Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP, Ukraine War Frontline update for the 12th of April 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the screen at the moment, pause the video. The key does let you know that these lines are defensive lines, as I've said a number of times this week, thanks to JR who's done the mapping. That means that when you look at these lines, and we'll go into the map at the moment, just to remind you, when we look at the three coloured lines here, well, actually, the white one indicates deep set maps from May the 30th, but the blue and the yellow and the red here, each of these are where these mappers think the Russians have definite control of. Anything, in this case, to the south of there, to the southwest of there, is a grey zone, and that might be a couple of kilometres worth of area that both sides might be involved in, or there's no one there and it's just they're firing stuff across it, but no one really controls it. No one's inhabiting any fortifications or trenches there. And then at some point to the southwest, the Ukrainians will be in trenches, and so there can be movements. The Russians can move forward, or indeed the Ukrainians can move forward, and you won't know it from the map because it's just a case of attacking into the grey zone, or the grey zone has shifted and that has pushed the Ukrainian control back a little bit, but it's not that the Russians have taken full control over that. Maybe the Ukrainians have deserted some fortifications due to huge shelling and whatnot, and it expands the size of the grey zone, but not the control of the Russian side. There would be too many lines with the synthesis of three mappers and a historical line to include both grey zones and the Ukrainian defensive line. So just have to reiterate that. Okay, so no change to the whole northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatove to Crimea. Again, this is incredibly good for the Ukrainians. A really good news there. There is something to say about the Terny area. Geolocated footage says the Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, they publish a report every day on what is going on. I don't always dip into it, but I am going to today. Geolocated footage published on the 10th, so that is 2 days ago, indicates that Russian forces marginally advanced east of Terny, and this is down at the salient here. So we've got Torska down there, Crimea, the city to the east over there, and then Terny up here. So let's see where the Institute for the Study of War has their geolocation. The translation, which is description being a shelling of Russian positions east of the village of Terny in the Donetsk region. I'm actually going to refresh that, so now we know what that says in English, but just because when I do the translation, it completely changes the formatting of the coordinates. Right, the first geolocation of the Russian positions is here. And we'll plug that into the map and see where the Russians are. So the Ukrainians are shelling the Russians there. Okay, that's precisely why one would think that Surrey Maps has mapped the Russians in that position. The next geolocation, and you've heard me long enough that you know what I'm going to say next regarding Surrey maps. Of course you do, but I will have to say it anyway. Half of my viewers at any one time are newbies. Right, so just because those points show that the Russians have been shelled there does not mean that the Russians control this area of land. And Surrey Maps, as a pro-Russian mapper, always seems to move the mapping lines to suggest Russians control an area if Russians are seen in that at that point or in that area. Andrew Perpetua will say, well, often, I mean, it depends what the evidence is and how much it is confirmed by subsequent pieces of evidence and data points. But Andrew Perpetua will say, well, the Russians have attacked there, they've been shelled by the Ukrainians, and they've retreated back. This is not under control of the Russians. This is just an attack that's been repelled. And so he would call this a grey zone, like I've just been talking about. And the Ukrainians will be somewhere over here. The Russians will be still back here. And just because they've attacked there, been shelled, it does not mean they control that land. And that's why there's a difference in the mappers. Surrey Maps' mapping style, as we know, is moving the Russian defensive lines as soon as the Russians move at all. Okay, then we come down to the Seversk front line towards the south of that axis in the Berestova-Vesely area as they're pushing along this railway line further to the north here, just north of the railway line next to this road. There's some interesting topography in this area. So we go into the 3D map and we can see that as we come down here, there are rises up and down, a bit of a slight incline going to in the direction of where the Ukrainian fortifications will be, and then some slightly higher ground here. This is a very undulating landscape around this point, so it means it's not going to be straightforward flat fields, move through, go to the next big tree line and hope for the best. There is a lot to consider when attacking. Nonetheless, the Russians are making some headway there, as according to Syriac maps. And the detail here is that Russian army made new advances northwest of Brestova. Troops are now 3.5 kilometers from Vienka settlement, and that appears to be where they're aiming for. Well, it could be aiming for anywhere around here, joining up forces with attacks on Spirna, but actually they seem to have come to a bit of a halt around Spirna. In fact, Syriac maps took their mapping way back in that area, which I thought was quite interesting. They were quite forward, like I've just been talking about, in claiming that Russians had control right through here, and it doesn't seem that's the case at the moment. But the Russians have been moving along towards Verkhnokamianska, which is a bit of a problem with regard to Bilahorivka area, where they're trying to operationally surround it. But if they can join up forces, really their big goal is Seversk, as quite an important town that is the key to this whole area. I say that it's a game of dominoes. Bilahorivka is that first domino that they don't want. The Ukrainians do not want that to fall, and I don't think it will. It's too difficult, and I think the Russians' only chance of getting the Ukrainians to leave from this area is to do this advance from the south, from the north, the river along there, and the forest means that it's practically impossible for them to do large-scale mechanized attacks. That's just never going to happen. If you remember, was it Balaklia, where they tried to get across and lost about 100 vehicles about a year and a half ago or sometime? The Russians, it was an absolute unmitigated disaster, and I don't think they'll want to try that again. So it's high ground to the south and trying to get across that river, so no chance of there. The topography here is too difficult, I think, for them to attack through from the east, so the best option is down to the south here. So this is where the Russians will concentrate if they are serious about taking the Seversk front line. And of course it depends how many resources and how many forces they have concentrated around here, but they are making some headway in that southern Seversk front line. No movement in Bakhmut, which I think is thoroughly interesting. Ivanivska and Chasiv Yar, it seems to go in fits and starts. It doesn't mean that there isn't fierce fighting in the area, as I'm sure there is. We'll dip into the ISW. I don't think there's actually too much in the ISW, interestingly. Yeah, here it's talking about the Seversk front line there, positional fighting, no confirmed changes, although there is that idea that towards Vienka, the Russians have made some gains, although the ISW doesn't confirm that. It then says geolocated published footage on April the 10th, so again 2 days ago, shows that the ISW which the ISW has previously reported on further indicates that Russian forces advanced west of Ivanivska along the T0504 Chasiv to Bakhmut highway. Now this would be a bit of a challenge for the Ukrainians. That's going to be this highway here coming through Ivanivska and to the west, so we can expect some geolocation. You would think that's going to be if it's west of Ivanivska, maybe over here, but I don't know. I'm interested to see where this is going to go. Let's look for that geolocation. So this is just a graveyard of vehicles that I've shown you before or referenced before in one of my losses videos. This site around Chasiv Yar, around Ivanivska and Chasiv Yar, is a site, as we've seen elsewhere on the front line, of huge amounts of losses for the Russians. So Ukrainian Black Swan unit shows destroyed. Ukrainian, actually it means to say Russian, so Russian vehicles west of Ivanivska. I think, I think that's a typo. Ukrainian, MTLBs. That doesn't necessarily mean. I mean, BTS4 destroyed cars. I don't know if it's even worth showing this, because I are the Ukrainians going to show destroyed Ukrainian stuff? I don't think so. I'm pretty sure these are going to be Russian destroyed vehicles, to be perfectly frank. So let's assume they are Russian and see where they end up and see what it tells us. Yeah, so it is in that general area that I was saying, but I would suggest if they are Russian vehicles, that is going to be attack along that road from their fortified area, or from Ivaniska really, further to the east. And I think this, given that there's a lot of destroyed vehicles there, I think this is probably a Russian attack along that highway, trying to push west from Ivaniska. So I don't think it shows necessarily territorial gain. I don't think they control this land, but yeah, all along there, I'm thinking that's probably Russian vehicles that are being shown, almost certainly. So interesting, they are pushing along there. Andrew Perpetua and Deep State Maps have not yet shown Ivaniska is being under Russian control. Greg Terry, some time back when I spoke to him, said, yep, Ivaniska is under Russian control. So there is a bit of a difference going on there. He was saying that based on people he'd been speaking to in the area. So who knows? But I guess it's going to be just pretty, if the Russians are here, it's okay, rewind. So the Ukrainians might well have pulled out of Ivaniska, which is what he was saying, Greg Terry. But it doesn't mean the Russians control Ivaniska, because this is a bit of a kill zone, kill box. Although the Russians control the high ground to the north, the Ukrainians are obviously to the west, to the south, and they'll be hammering it. We know that they are hammering it with guided glide bombs, interestingly. The French provided hammer bombs, AASM 50s, that are peppering the buildings here. So the idea is that the Russians probably don't robustly control this. They are getting hammered there, and they're probably sticking to the western areas of Ivaniska where they did have previous, robust control. So that's the situation there. I would suggest that it might possibly be grey zone, and that's what explains the difference in the mappers there. All right, as we move further to the south and come... Oh, no. I'm going to read you Surat Maps' post on Chasiv Yar. So he said today, bombardment of Chasiv Yar already considerably exceeds that of Bakhmut. Guided bombs have revolutionized the dynamic of the front. Relatively inexpensive bombs that do not require great precision, but which allow considerable damage to be done in the area around the impact. This type of weapon has been elemental in destroying the Avdiivka defences. Instrumental, I think he means, and remains so for the trench system encountered by the advancing Russian forces. A situation somewhat reminiscent of the Syrian civil war, when the Air Force made use of barrel bombs due to a lack of ammunition. These low-cost bombs were instrumental, he said it there, in destroying rebel positions and paving the way for offences. We should not expect a collapse of the Ukrainian army defences with these guided bombs, but we will see how they will accelerate the advance because of their destructive power, but delivered systematically and not through a general bombing campaign, i.e. locations that in the past were unable to be taken by the Russians are now being taken by the Russian army. Broadly correct there. So Chasiv Yar is in a heck of a state. It has been absolutely hammered by guided glide bombs in a way that Bakhmut wasn't. So Bakhmut took an absolute hammering predominantly from artillery, and those guided glide bombs came a bit later. There probably was bombing taking place, but these larger, especially the sort of 1,500 kilogram carb bombs, are munitions that have been used much more widely since Bakhmut was taken, and indeed it's Avdiivka and it's Chasiv Yar at the moment that have been and the whole northern border, it appears, that have borne the brunt of those munitions. Right, then coming further to the south, we get to the Avdiivka salient, and you can see that there are Russian gains, according to Surat Maps, into Novokonyovo. That is definitely worrying that the Russians have at least been there. This will be based on a geolocated video. It doesn't mean that they control that area, as already mentioned, ad infinitum, but it is worrying that they've got into that settlement to attack. And then some confirmed gains for the Russians, such that Andrew Perpetua and Deep State Maps agree that the Russians have a bit more control of the area around Badici and going north to the top of this river, which is a problem because this is where the river starts. It's the source of the river, and if the Russians get around the north of that river, they can come back down here and put pressure on the Ukrainians from the north and from level ground. So this is high ground here. If you look at, I don't know, down at the bottom right of the map, so down where my cursor is over here, you can see a height. So that is 200 meters. Yeah, about the same, 200, 201, 184, comes down and then back to the other side of the river, 172. So there's a good 30-meter difference, and then, up and down a little bit, 169 there. So we have lower around the river, and this is why the Russians are penned, but, well, mainly, although Semenivka looks interesting, but the other mappers generally think that's Surat map saying that the Russians have got robust control of most of Semenivka. Andrew Perpetuan Deep State map not agreeing there, but nonetheless, this river is a natural barrier, and we have here 187 as opposed to 197. So as the river gets closer to its source, it starts leveling up each side, as you would expect. And then here we've got 205 meters, 208 meters, pretty much the same. And this is where the Russians will want to come around here on level with this ground and attack from the north. Now, over here, Novokonyovo, they're also trying to push forward there. I was thinking originally this is going to be an attempt to be part of that push around the side here, but I don't know whether it's kind of separate push north just for the sake of it. Rebar talks about the attack here. This is a very pro-Russian source saying Avdiivka direction in the Novokonyovo area. The Russian armed forces have occupied several plantations to the south of the settlement. Aviation and artillery are striking at the fortified area, and the enemy is trying to counter-attack. So it is admitting that the Ukrainians are putting up some fight there, but it is fighting within the settlement by the looks of it of Novokonyovo, and again using those guided glide bombs. It's that sort of combined arms initiative. Surat Mat says of this area, the Russian armies continue advancing southeast of Novokonyovo and entered the first houses of the locality. Clashes with the Ukrainian army are taking place in the first street there. So fighting in that urban area is ongoing. Right, let's now go further to the south. Good news that there's no more movement around the Umanska area between Pervomaisky and Umanska. That seems to have had a quieter day, considering there has been some large amounts of land that Russians have attacked into. And again, this talks about going on big attacks, but not necessarily controlling the ground. There was a I think 3-vehicle attack that got quite far to the west, and that was challenging for the Ukrainians because it's kind of got behind their lines, at least as they are defending these fields. There's a difference, as you can see, between the mappers in this area, quite substantial difference, really. Let's look at that in terms of how far from Andrew Perpetua to Surat maps at the furthest. So that's 4.5 kilometer difference. That's really quite significant. But it could be that either one could well be correct, or it could be the truth could be somewhere in the middle. It's just dynamic and hard to know. Right, coming on further to the south, we can see that no changes to Krasnohorivka. That's really good news. No changes to Marenka, no changes to Novomikhailovka. Just going to pop into the Institute for the Study of War, actually, because I might have missed something there. No, actually, it doesn't really talk about anything particularly different that we haven't already gleaned from other sources in both the Avdiivka and in the Novomikhailovka area. No confirmed changes to the front line there, etc., etc. But still, that's where there's a lot of tough fighting. Now, we're going to go to the southern front line here. Velika Novosilka, Robotina there. We're going to go to Urizhiny, which is down on this starry... What's the name of the river? It's so long since I've talked about this area that I've forgotten what it's called. A Mokry-Yali river, that was it. This meandering river that comes through Urizhiny, and I'm pretty sure we've got some claims about Urizhiny. No, not that one. That's crinky. So here we have Ukrainian drone observes a Russian attack south of Urizhiny, destruction of a Russian vehicle and infantry with artillery and FPV drones. Geolocation below. So there you go. You can kind of find all these videos and work out what's going on. And I can't really show you those videos because stuff gets blown up. And I saw a Russian. I can't remember what it was, like a BTR something like that. APC going over a kind of something like, I don't know, an embankment, railway track or something like that. You couldn't see because it was thermal imagery, and it hits a mine. It's got people on top, like a bunch of Russian soldiers, as you would expect, as they often do. And I mean, it's horrific. This is the horrors of war. But there's quite a substantial mine explosion. Sometimes you see people sort of catapulted off, and it's very easy to get desensitized to this and normalize what you're seeing. And these are human beings, right? And I've never seen human beings be thrown so far and so fast. There are two that were catapulted off the front. It looked like not even ragdolls. It was almost too quickly flying through the air for that. It was absolutely horrific. And yeah, these are quite small on the screen, but you get an understanding of how horrific some of these instances are. Anyway, this particular attack was taking place. Let's have a look. So these are the Russian vehicles in this position. So yeah, that's just exactly where you expect them to be. All the mappers agree here. And this is a good, nice, clear example of attacking into the grey zone, moving forward, getting close to this tree line. And then the claim is, let's have a look, sudden attack south, of the Russians. And infantry fighting vehicle AFE explodes. Ukrainian artillery strikes close to Russian AFE. Unclear results. Someone else says it explodes. All right, same person actually, but maybe a different vehicle in the same video. Russian tank attacks Ukrainian position southwest of Orozhany under artillery shelling. The tank is hit twice but manages to escape. Russian tank hit at that point. Ukrainian artillery impact at that point. So let's see where the Russian... So this is an example of attacking into a grey zone, and the Russian tank is here before... This is where it gets hit, and then it manages to escape. So it's not catastrophically hit. It's not destroyed. What is going wrong with my copying and pasting? Thank you very much. So that's moving further to the west, and we have a tank getting as far as that tree line, and then most probably shooting back to their own lines there. But anyway, quite a battle going on at Orozhany there. Well, I say quite a battle. 3 or 4 vehicles being used in attack. The question is, would they attack with more? If they could, I assume they would. So they probably can't. They probably don't have the troops and the vehicles, and you could probably say the same for the Ukrainians. So as both sides are being attrited, they get smaller and smaller, and it's the same situation. You either both sides have more and you attack and nothing happens, or both sides have fewer troops and fewer vehicles and the same thing happens, right? So we're going to go to Robotyne here, where geolocated footage, says the ISW, published on the 9th, so that's now 3 days ago, indicates that Russian forces recently marginally advanced within western Robotyne. This is another Telegram one here. So description states that the destruction of an enemy armoured personnel carrier in the village of Robotyne. So this is a Russian APC being taken out as far as I can work out. And we'll see where that is. And so interesting. So that is, again, an attack into Robotyne, but really quite far north into Robotyne, being taken out. And actually that suggests, I would suggest that might well be that Surat Maps might have a better idea of Russian control here, because that's an awful long way from where, say, Andrew Perpetua has the control, the Russian control. So that would be a 2.5 kilometer attack into the grey zone. That could still be true. In fact, you know, it's probably unlikely that the Russians have got control of these houses. Maybe it might be more realistic that they've got control of the trench lines down here, and that they're then pushing their mechanized forces along this road and then getting hit up here. But you know, who knows? Is dynamic there as well. The Ukrainians have done a pretty good job of keeping the Russians at bay there, but it's about grinding successes for the Russians, isn't it? It's just, if it's first you don't succeed, try and try again, even if that includes losing umpteen numbers of troops and gazillions of vehicles. Right. We're going to go now to the Dnipro River. I've said very little about Dnipro River for a long time. ISW has quite a bit to say about it, though, and we're going to dip into this. So, Russian forces recently advanced near the limited Ukrainian bridgehead on the east or left bank of the Dnipro River and on the islands in the Dnipro River. Geolocated footage published on the 11th indicates that Russian forces recently advanced within Krinky. So it's a bit worrying for the Ukrainians here. So destruction of Russian militants and destruction of their shelters, the village of Krinky in Kherson. And I'm going to just refresh that because I want to make sure that I get the correct geolocations here. So these are Russian forces being hit within Krinky. Now let's geolocate that. So Krinky is in this area. Well, we'll zoom in a little bit. And that's where we have the Russian defensive lines. Remember, none of this is actually controlled by Ukrainians. No one say the Ukrainians control that. That is all grey zone. And the Ukrainians have got robust control further back here. But they are both operating within that area, no doubt. And let's see where Russians have been hit. Let's see if that can tell us anything. So that's right in the mix. Okay, that is worrying, but I've heard Andrew say pretty much what I've said recently, which is not quite sure what the Ukrainians are still doing over there, because I think their job has pretty much been done. They've managed to attrit so much Russian equipment in the surrounding area, not talking about... Oops, I'm pressing the wrong thing. Not talking about taking out equipment in Krinky, but the fact that it's attracted so many Russian troops and forces, mechanized forces, to the area, that has been attrited. These have been largely attrited by Magyar's birds and other units operating on them. But if the Russians are then learning from that and keeping their equipment further back now, is it time for the Ukrainians to pull back, or what is their raison d'etre for remaining there? We'll now plug in that second geolocation, and so pretty much this is, I'd imagine, just a grey zone where you've got different troops going from different, both sides going from house to house, except there aren't really houses. This is just completely wrecked buildings that are just, they're not even shells of their former selves. There's just a lot of rubble, and it's difficult to really hang out, even to I think make a dugout or a base of any of these houses there. So Russians being hit there, but that probably does show that the Russians are really closing the net on the Ukrainians in this location. Geolocated footage on the 11th also indicates that Russian forces recently began operating on the southern part of Velika Potemkin Island, north of Holopristan. And the implication here is that they are further into the grey zone or into Ukrainian territory than they previously were. So if I am right, this is Veliki Potemkin Island. That is, there's a river that goes through it that seems to indicate control. Russians, though, might control some area just around here. Andrew Perpetua doesn't agree with that, still has that as grey zone. We'll see what this telegram message says. So, horror from heaven, 123rd Brigade Territorial Defence, showing the destruction of enemy stronghold, the village of Bilogrodove in Kherson region. So this is a Russian stronghold being destroyed. We'll see where that is and see what it might tell us. Interesting. So that is an area that Andrew Perpetua has no. So what is his line doing here? Because the river is all a bit confusing. So he has that as Russian control. So I think I might have to look, but I have a feeling. No. I don't know, because it's all a bit confusing. The lines are confused by the river. Nonetheless, the Russians are in this area. Certainly Surat Maps does not have that under Russian control, and so that could well be a move into the grey zone, or it might actually show that the Russians do actually control more of this island than previously thought. Now, there are quite a few settlements on this island. Like this whole southern coast of it is an urban settlement. In fact, pretty much all around most of this northern part of the Russian-controlled area, or at least that part of it, is an urban settlement, and also the other side of the Prohny River, we have a lot of settlement there. So don't think these are just complete like river delta islands with nothing on them. These are like fishing settlements, and the Russians and the Ukrainians are fighting on Veliki Potemkin Island. We'll just go back to the ISW to see if they say anything else. So positional fighting continued on the east bank of the Dnipro, including near Krinky. On April the 11th, Ukrainian Southern Operational Command spokesperson Natalia Humaniuk stated that Ukraine forces typically wound or kill roughly 60% of the personnel in Russian assault groups that attack Ukrainian positions on the east bank. That's incredible. I mean, that shows that the Russians are losing a lot of men. And if that is at a ratio that is better than 3-1, is what I normally say, then that's going to be a calculation that the Ukrainian forces will be making that it's worth staying in Krinky. I don't think you can realistically use this as a springboard to take any further land without masses of troops and equipment. So, in other words, this is nothing to do with it's nothing to do with the offensive in terms of territory. It's to do with offensive in terms of attriting Russian forces, troops and equipment. And so I assume that is part of that calculation. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about are these, and we're going to go there, these rigs that are between Crimea and Odessa. I'll just bring them up on my map. And again, as I should do every time I do the mapping, thank you for JR, who's done the mapping again. If we ever get to Ukraine again, sorry, I'm trying to do too many things at once. If we ever get to Ukraine, JR, I owe him just a massive beer or 50. I don't know when that's going to happen. Timing wise, I need to think about my children, my family and whatnot, but I'd love to go back to Ukraine if Greg indeed would have us or help us. Talking about these, so Russian sources claimed on April the 11th that Russian forces repelled sabotage and reconnaissance groups that attempted to land on East Bank. Oh no, we're not. Oh yes. No, right. On the east bank of Kherson Oblast and on a drilling platform in the Black Sea, the Russian Federal Security Service (FSB) Operations Center claimed that unspecified Russian forces repelled a Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance group that attempted to land on the Tendrivska Spit as well. So they're trying a number of things. So there's an oil rig somewhere that the Ukrainians have tried to land on. There's also, this is a Tendrinska Spit. That was it was the spot where the Ukrainians attacked, and it was a disastrous attack, and they lost a bunch of Marines, and some people questioning the sense of doing that. I think it's so difficult to do surprise attacks. There's so many eyes in the sky, satellite and drone and whatnot. Goodness me, you have to be very, very lucky or some very clever thing to be able to do successful attacks like that. Although they have done that, they did it in Olenivka area, in the Mayak area, where the special forces landed and did achieve some small goal there. But yeah, I just think it's such a demand. Anyway, FSB also claimed that FSB officers prevented a Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance group from landing on a drilling rig in the Stormove gas field area in the Black Sea. I don't actually know where that is, but you can see that these are the ones I think that the Ukrainians have control of. There will be others. And of course, any other one they can get control of itself acts as a further site to put air defense, whether that be man pads rather than anything larger than that, is still going to give you some pretty good ability to hit Russian planes and helicopters if they come too near, which then protects Odessa area more. Depends where these oil rigs are, of course, or gas rigs. And it also allows them to put reconnaissance equipment, so radars and whatnot, so or electronic warfare equipment, so to block the Russians from being able to do stuff. So these can be particularly useful sites for Ukrainians to gain control of. I'll have to find out where those rigs that they were talking about there are exactly. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all your support. Take care. It's been a lot of content today. I hope it's useful to you, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. I do have a kid doing lots of sport over the next 2 days of the weekend, so I can't guarantee when I'm going to get my content out. And the final thing I will say is that just a bit of news. I was just reading that Mike Johnson is having a meeting with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. There's talk that Mike Johnson has offered the olive branch, in a sense, to Marjorie Taylor Greene and has asked her to be an advisor to him as part of his kitchen cabinet. If that's the case, Ukraine aid ain't going to get done under Mike Johnson, and Mike Johnson has capitulated to the MAGA extremists, and there's no chance really. So the idea with Marjorie Taylor Greene and that kind of Freedom Caucus bunch of Republicans who are not going to do any deal for Ukraine aid is you either so he's got a gun against his head, Mike Johnson, with regard to doing anything bipartisan or anything responsible in terms of governance in the House of Representatives. He either says, screw you, I'm going to get Democrats to not vote me out of my seat. So actually, you can't vacate my seat because I'm going to actually get some help from a lot of Republicans who have said that they would do that. They don't want him to be vacated, and actually they're against Marjorie Taylor Greene doing that. So he will get a lot of Republicans supporting him and Democrats, and that would be enough to keep his seat safe. Or the other option is he goes full on MAGA, and because he's been known as MAGA Mike, right? It's only to do with doing his job as a speaker, trying to work in a bipartisan fashion, and in doing that to keep the government open, Marjorie Taylor Greene and others have gone nuts on him as if that's irresponsible. No, that's governing. But anyway, if he's now embracing Marjorie Taylor Greene, he has done what many people have thought he would do, which is not look to give aid to Ukraine. It was all a number of feints, or he's just genuinely changed his tack on that. But either way, you ain't going to see aid come through unless something else happens, unless Republicans go, right, we're not going to do it through a bill, so we're now going to have to sign the discharge petition, which has gained another vote, I think, today, and they need, I think, only 24 votes now for that discharge petition, but that you do need Republicans to walk across the aisle and get that signed. Quite why they don't is beyond me, but well, I do understand. It's Trump before principle. Anyway, thank you very much. Take care. Speak soon.